In a world where Western civilization is constantly under assault from forces that seek to reject any value that it may have, in a world where America is falling apart at the seams due to seemingly irreconcilable worldviews and political and social dispositions, in a world where internationalist groups seek to erode national sovereignty in the name of this universalist unity, which only really exists as a fantasy and not as a reality. In a world where all of these things are coming together and they pose a threat to those of us who do love Western civilization and those of us who consequently also love America, we can't afford to get distracted. And yet, the realities of this world don't seem to factor into the considerations of those whose minds are captured by the 24-hour or the 48-hour or the 72-hour news cycle that happens to decide and set the standard for what will be talked about in political conversation. When you have Onlyfans models being interviewed by one of the biggest personalities in the sort of conservative space, Michael Knowles, and that becomes a topic of conversation and generates a lot of controversy amongst people. Or when you have two prominent media personalities like Candace Owens and Ben Shapiro fighting, and people seem more interested in the fight between those two as opposed to the subject matter that they're supposed to be addressing in that fight, when these things become the dominant predictors and determinants of what we talk about as people who are politically and socially aware and who are informed, then we my friends, are most certainly in trouble. We're not just in a modicum of trouble. We are in major trouble because none of these things actually are enlightening or important or advance understanding compared to the challenges that we in the West throughout our respective societies face today. And yet, people cling to these distractions. They cling to these distractions because these distractions activate their lizard brain, the emotional part of you. These distractions activate their impulses, and they give them an exciting diversion from the more serious and substantive matters that are actually occurring and allow them to filter their energy into something that is not as serious, that is not as substantive, but has the appearance of being substantive and serious because these ideas or these disputes rather, are proximal to actual substantive and serious issues. The issue of finding redemption in a world that is constantly trying to push you towards vice, which is the case of this Onlyfans star, I suppose, that's a serious issue. That is an issue located in the very heart of the human condition. That is an issue that I think a lot of people throughout history have struggled with, have grappled with, going all the way back to St. Augustine. That's a serious and that's a beautiful issue. But it's clouded over by the Onlyfans star. The issue with Israel and Palestine, that's a multi-generational issue going back centuries, really. If you look at the history of the conflict and the conquest and the socio-religious connection to that particular part of the world, that's a very serious issue. But it's clouded over by Ben Shapiro and Candace Owens fighting. My friends, we exist in a culture of a mass distraction, not destruction, although at least a destruction, of a mass distraction that utilizes our tendency to be moved by emotions and passion, and then sends that into overdrive, to send our minds into a place where we cannot learn, we cannot grow, we cannot be enlightened, we cannot think deeply, we cannot engage with substance. We simply engage in vain emptiness, and we are then convicted to believe that we've done something good. Now, the insidious effect of mass distraction is actually, it's really just twofold. But the primary effect is that mass distraction manages to shift the value thinking of its victims. What do I mean? Well, there's an old saying, what you're surrounded by, what you surround yourself with, becomes what you believe, what you think, what you are. Now, This is overstated a lot, but essentially it is true. Human beings require reference points, things that exist in the world, to be able to engage with the world and fill in the missing parts of the world with some intelligible words that will then help us define and understand those parts of the world. And if we are surrounding ourselves with particular ideas, those ideas will undoubtedly have an impact on how we interact with the world. And they will also have an impact on our decision making. And this is how the culture of mass distraction harms its victims most importantly. The culture of mass distraction reduces the decision making of people who are caught in it from a rational level, which all human beings by default are endowed with, the rational faculty to engage with the world in a critical way and to seek out the transcendent truth, to a level that is almost, if I'm going to use an animal analogy here, akin to a cat seeking out catnip so he can get a reaction, akin to a druggie trying to hit the bong several times so he can get a high. It reduces our decision making to what excites us emotionally and leaves reason in the back seat. And in a world where our decision making is shifted from reason and consideration and deliberate thought towards emotion, towards what excites us, but not what is good for us, not what is good for our soul or our thinking, our values are then changed and shaped in light of that circumstance. In an environment where dopamine hits and algorithms drive our engagement, form the concepts in our mind, rather than the deliberate reflection that comes with having reason as a human being, you get a system of lower values at the expense of higher values. Now, let's ask ourselves the question, what are lower values and what are higher values, and why are lower values or higher values, what are their significance to how we understand society and how we understand politics? Well, higher values, my friends, are things like truth, goodwill, charity, veracity, right, which is basically truth as well, cooperation, mutual cooperation, voluntary engagement in the community. These are higher values because these are things that arise and spring from a mind that is enriched with the right moral concepts that are required for the preservation of society based on the idea of justice, and is also engaged in rational deliberation, critical deliberation, logical deliberation of its processes. Higher values can only come from a mind of a thinking person. Because in order to find the truth, you have to think. You have to wade through certain areas that may seem daunting. They may question your own perspectives. They may question your own beliefs. But at the end of that tunnel that you're getting through, there's something there, even if it's not something that you particularly wanted to see, even if it is something that actually shatters your worldview. But lower values, my friends, are thoughts, ideas, and actions that are formed from mere impulse, mere opinion, buttressed by impulse, buttressed by emotion, and then don't require really engagement. They don't require thought. They simply require passivity. They require you to be a consumer, not a producer. They require you to be the recipient, not the sender. The problem in society today is that we have too many people who want to be the consumers and not the senders. So to speak, we have a lot of, to put it in layman's terms, NPCs that just go around doing whatever they are told or receiving whatever is given to them. They have no filtration system, and therefore they become this sponge that soaks up their environment rather than being able to separate the bad from the good like we should do in life and move on. And this poses massive political, social, and civilizational consequences for anyone in society. In a culture of higher values, a culture where truth, charity, and the behaviors required to get those things are emphasized and they are pursued, Candace Owens and Ben Shapiro aren't the conversation. They are rather subsumed within a broader context that focuses instead on how to reconcile divergent viewpoints within the socio-political sphere of right-leaning thought. Because the Owens and Shapiro controversy isn't really about Israel. It's really about how do you reconcile in a discussion, in a discourse that for so many decades has been shut forcefully and imposed upon with one single perspective. How do you reconcile divergent perspectives that may seem either hateful or they may seem ill-informed with the dominant perspective? That's the deeper philosophical part of all of this. And yet, it has become about two personalities. In a culture of higher values, it's no longer about the Onlyfans star, but it's instead about the nature of redemption, change, and the pursuit of virtue in the face of a world that is going against all of those things. A much deeper and universal conversation. And yet it has become about the Onlyfans star, Michael Knowles, and if the Onlyfans star is grifting or not. That's what lower values do. Because lower values, ultimately, my friend, they transform man's mind into something, as I mentioned before, that is solely passive. It simply receives. It does not filter. It does not do anything more than react emotionally like an animal would react to something else like that. You can't have a good society built on that kind of foundation. You can't have good political conversation. You can't arrive at any coherent solution to the problems we're facing right now in the West if we have this vapid attitude overtaking us in almost every single way possible. And yet this culture of mass distraction has become so incentivized by the way we consume information, has become so incentivized by the forces that push the way we consume information, algorithms, so on and so forth. And it has become so incentivized by the reactions of people who have become so accustomed, right, terminally online, accustomed to this kind of way of receiving information, that they think if you try to speak against it or you do anything that goes beyond the status quo, you are either being long-winded or pretentious. Do you know how many times I've tried to explain a philosophical problem to somebody on a political issue, and they've told me, you're being long-winded. Oh, Christian, you're being evasive. Oh, you're trying to deceive me, Christian. You're trying to be a sophist. Really? Because 20, 30, 40 years ago, William F. Buckley was sitting around with Gore Vidal, one of the two smartest men to ever come out of American politics. And they were talking about deep issues that go all the way back to ancient Greece that most Americans today didn't hear of, but it enhanced the conversation back then. It wasn't pretentious. It wasn't anything. It was essential to get to the core root of problems. And yet this culture of mass distraction has not only shifted our values and replaced them with an inferior system of lower values, which are simply moved by impulse and moved by emotion and not moved instead by rational consideration, but it has also made us antagonistic towards anyone who would seek to push us back in the right direction. Because in this culture of lower values, of mass distraction, the distraction is so entertaining, the distraction is so enticing, the distraction is so all-consuming, that it almost becomes a part of how we perceive political conversation should actually be. And that's dangerous. Because if you show a man a certain reality, and he grows his entire life, or a good part of his life, not knowing anything different, he will accept it as the truth. It is the allegory of the cave on steroids. And that is what we are facing right now, my friends. Ultimately, we have two options. We can embrace the culture of mass distraction as the way things are, and we can try to work within it to sell our points, to be advocates of the West, to defend the American Republic, or to advocate for our worldview. Or we can do what I suggest and reject the culture of mass distraction, reject the problem of lower values, fall away from the cult of mere opinion and passion and desire overtaking your ability to logically consider these issues, study philosophy, endorse an axiomatically sound set of first principles by which you consider every social and political issue, not just some that benefit you, and remain focused on the overarching ideas that constitute the specific subjects that happen to exist in our political conversation, and not become bogged down in personalities and identities and temporal fleeting conflicts that in the grand scheme of things don't really matter. It doesn't really matter what this Onlyfans girl does. It doesn't really matter what Ben Shapiro and Candace Owens does. It doesn't really matter if your favorite influencer gets into a fight with Cardi B. It doesn't really matter it doesn't really matter. What ultimately matters is if you are able to extract anything from these interactions, from these events that inform you and make you better prepared to take on the challenges that we in our country or we in the West will have to take on. If you are not, then my friend, I would submit to you that you are spending your time in a way that is not advantageous towards your society, your civilization, or most importantly, towards you. And that must be rejected. That must be rejected, and that must be replaced with a better way of pursuing meaning in this age of mass distraction. Reject mere opinion, reject passion and desire overriding your thoughts. Reject these temporal fleeting disputes and embrace that eternal quest for meaning and substance that really defines the story of America and defines the discovery of every transformational concept in human history that allowed human beings to progress in the way that we have now, that has given us both good and bad, the world we have now, some of the least poverty, some of the most declining rates of people dying from diseases and all kinds of things. Fundamental good things, bad things too, but fundamental good things. I want to continue that, but I want to continue that in a healthy way that'll benefit all of us, while still, in my opinion, keeping intact our sanity. Because right now, that is not something that is considered whatsoever. So my friends, I would submit to you, we have to resist the culture of mass distraction. And we must do something else. Or else, we'll just become continually consumed in this cycle of outrage, continually consumed in this cycle of diversion, and continually and perpetually not feeding our minds with the nectar that it needs to survive and to grow. My friends, like this video, comment on this video, share this video, subscribe to this channel. If you want to support me, you can donate to me if you want. You can do all kinds of donate to me. It's all in the comments down below. My friends, study history, study philosophy, remain morally convicted, and please stay pensive. Bye, guys.